Chinese opera. Traditional Chinese opera, simplified Chinese, Xiqu, traditional Chinese, Xiqu, pinyin, Xiqu, Jyutping, he3 or Xiqu, is a form of musical theater in China with roots going back to the early periods in China. It is an amalgamation of various art forms that existed in ancient China and evolved gradually over more than 1,000 years, reaching its mature form in the 13th century during the Song dynasty 960–1279. Early forms of Chinese theater are simple, but over time they incorporated various art forms, such as music, song and dance, martial arts, acrobatics, costume, and makeup art, as well as literary art forms to become traditional Chinese opera. There are over 100 regional branches of traditional Chinese opera today. In the 20th century, the Peking opera emerged in popularity and has come to known as the National Theatre of China, but other genres like opera, Cantonese opera, opera, qinqiang, Huangmei opera, pingju, and Sichuan opera are also performed regularly before dedicated fans. Their differences are mainly found in the music and topolect. The stories are often shared and borrowed, with few exceptions such as revolutionary operas, and to some extent Shanghai operas. The vast majority of Chinese operas, including Taiwanese operas, are set in China before the 17th century, whether they are traditional or newly written. For centuries, Chinese opera was the main form of entertainment for both urban and rural residents in China, as well as the Chinese diaspora. Its popularity declined sharply in the second half of the 20th century as a result of both political and market factors. Language policies discouraging topolects in Taiwan and Singapore, official hostility against rural religious festivals in China, and desinization in Taiwan have all been blamed for the decline of various forms in different times, but overall the two major culprits were Cultural Revolution, which saw traditional culture systematically erased, innumerable theater, professional. The total number of regional genres was determined to be more than 350 in 1957. But in the 21st century, the Chinese government could only identify 162 forms for its intangible cultural heritage list, with many of them in immediate danger of disappearing. For young people, Chinese opera is no longer part of the everyday popular music culture, but it remains an attraction for many older people who find in it, among other things, a national or regional identity. History. 6 dynasties to Tang. An early form of Chinese drama is the Kanzhen opera Kanzhengzai, or adjutant play, which originated from the later Zhou dynasty 319–351. In its early form, it was a simple comic drama involving only 2 performers, where a corrupt officer, Kanzhen, or the adjutant, was ridiculed by a jester named Grey Hawk Kanggu. The characters in Kanzhen opera are thought to be the forerunners of the fixed-role categories of later Chinese opera, particularly of its comic Chu-Chu characters. Various song and dance dramas developed during the 6 dynasties period. During the Northern Kai dynasty, a masked dance called the Big Face Da Mayan, which can mean mask, alternatively Damien Dai Mayan, and it was also called the King of Lanling, Lanling Wang, was created in honor of Gao Changgong, who went into battle wearing a mask. Another was called Batu Bo Tu, also Bo Tu, a masked dance drama from the western regions that tells the story of a grieving son who sought a tiger that killed his father. In the dancing singing woman Ta Yao Niang, which relates the story of a wife battered by her drunken husband, the song and dance drama was initially performed by a man dressed as a woman. The stories told of in these song and dance dramas are simple, but they are thought to be the earliest pieces of musical theater in China and the precursors to the more sophisticated later forms of Chinese opera. These forms of early drama were popular in the Tang dynasty, where they further developed. For example, by the end of the Tang dynasty, the Kanzhen opera had evolved into a performance with more complex plot and dramatic twists, and it involved at least 4 performers. The early form of Chinese theater became more organized in the Tang dynasty, with Emperor Xuanzong 712–755, who founded the Pear Garden Liyuan, the first academy of music to train musicians, dancers, and actors. The performers formed what may be considered the first known opera troupe in China, and they performed mostly for the emperor's personal pleasure. To this day, operatic professionals are still referred to as disciples of the Pear Garden Liyuan Daizai/Liyuan Daizai, Liyuan Dizi. Song to King. By the Song dynasty, Quanzhen opera had become a performance that involved singing and dancing, and led to the development of zaju. Forms such as the zaju and nangxi nanzai further matured in the Song dynasty 960–1279. In the Yuan dynasty 1279–1368 acts, based on rhyming schemes and innovations such as specialized roles like dan, female, sheng, male, hue, painted face, and chu, clown were introduced into the opera. Although actors in theatrical performances of the Song dynasty strictly adhered to speaking in classical Chinese on stage, during the Yuan dynasty actors speaking or performing lyrics in the vernacular tongue became popular on stage. In the Yuan poetic drama, only one person sang for all of the 4 acts, but in the poetic dramas that developed from Nangxi during the Ming dynasty 1368–1644, all the characters were able to sing and perform. A playwright Gao Ming late in the Yuan dynasty wrote an opera called Tale of the People, which became highly popular and became a model for Ming dynasty drama, as it was the favorite opera of the first Ming Emperor Zhu Yuanjing. The presentation at this point resembled the Chinese opera of today, except that the librettos were then very long. The operatic artists were required to be skilled in many fields. According to recollections of Tao and Tao and Mengyi by Zhang Dai, performers had to learn how to play various musical instruments, singing and dancing before they were taught acting. The dominant form of the Ming and early Qing dynasties was kunqu, which originated in the Wu cultural area. A famous work in kunqu is the Peony Pavilion by Tang Xianzu. Kunqu later evolved into a longer form of play called qinqiang, which became one of the 5 melodies that made up Sichuan opera. Currently, Chinese operas continue to exist in 368 different forms, the best known being Beijing opera, which assumed its present form in the mid-19th century and was extremely popular in the latter part of the Qing dynasty 1644–1911. In Beijing opera, traditional Chinese string and percussion instruments provide a strong rhythmic accompaniment to the acting. The acting is based on allusion, gestures, footwork, and other body movements express such actions as riding a horse, rowing a boat, or opening a door. Spoken dialogue is divided into recitative and Beijing colloquial speech, the former employed by serious characters and the latter by young females and clowns. Character roles are strictly defined, and each character have their own elaborate make-up design. The traditional repertoire of Beijing opera includes more than 1,000 works, mostly taken from historical novels about political and military struggles. 1912–1949. At the turn of the 20th century, Chinese students returning from abroad began to experiment with Western plays. Following the May 4th movement of 1919, a number of Western plays were staged in China, and Chinese playwrights began to imitate this form. The most notable of the new style playwrights was Cao Yubi, 1910. His major works Thunderstorm, Sunrise, Wilderness, and Peking Man, written between 1934 and 1940, have been widely read in China. The Republican era saw the rise of Yu opera and all-female Yu opera troupes in Shanghai and Zhejiang. A woman-centric form, with all-female casts and majority female audience members, plots were often love stories. Its rise was related to the changing place of women in society. In the 1930s, theatrical productions performed by traveling Red Army cultural troops in communist-controlled areas were consciously used to promote party goals and political philosophy. By the 1940s, theater was well established in the communist-controlled areas. 1949–1985. In the early years of the People's Republic of China, development of Peking opera was encouraged. As a popular art form, opera has usually been the first of the arts to reflect changes in Chinese policy. In the mid-1950s, for example, it was the first to benefit under the Hundred Flowers campaign, such as the birth of Jilin opera. Opera may be used as commentaries on political affairs, and in November 1965, the attack on Beijing Deputy Mayor Wu Han and his historical play Hai Rui dismissed from office as anti-Mao signaled the beginning of the Cultural Revolution. During the Cultural Revolution, most opera troupes were disbanded, performers and scriptwriters were persecuted, and all operas were banned except the 8 model operas that had been sanctioned by Qing and her associates. Western-style plays were condemned as dead drama and poisonous weeds and were not performed. After the fall of the Gang of Four in 1976, Beijing opera enjoyed a revival and continued to be a very popular form of entertainment, both on stage and television. Present. In the 21st century, Chinese opera is seldom publicly staged except in formal Chinese opera houses. It may also be presented during the lunar 7th-month Chinese Ghost Festival in Asia as a form of entertainment to the spirits and audience. More than 30 famous pieces of kunqu opera continue to be performed today, including the Peony Pavilion, the Peach Blossom Fan, and adaptations of Journey to the West, Romance of the Three Kingdoms. In 2001, kunqu was recognized as Masterpiece of Oral and Intangible Heritage of Humanity by United Nations Educational, Cultural, and Scientific Organization UNESCO. Costumes and makeups. Exaggerated paints on opera performers' face which ancient warriors decorated themselves to scare the enemy are used in the opera. Each color has a different meaning. They are used to symbolize a character's role, fate, and illustrate the character's emotional state and general character. White symbolizes sinister, evil, crafty, treacherous, and suspicious. Any performer with white painted face usually takes the part of a villain of the show. The larger the white painted area, the crueler the role. Green denotes impulsive behavior, violence, no self-restraint or self-control. Red stands for bravery or loyalty. Black denotes boldness, fierceness, impartiality, rough. Yellow symbolizes ambition, fierceness, or intelligence. Blue stands for steadfastness, someone who is loyal and sticks to one side no matter what. Pink symbolizes sophistication and cool-headedness. Moreover, paint figures have different types. For instance, overall painted face, and only painted in the center of the face, connecting eyes and nose. Musical characteristics. Medium. String instruments. Traditional Chinese string instruments used in Chinese opera include geihu, erhu, pipa, sanxian, yankin, yuikin, jinghu, jingerhu, wingerhu, banhu, erxian. Percussion instruments. Traditional Chinese percussion instruments used in Chinese opera include peiben bow, bangu, daluo, xiaoluo. Woodwind instruments. Traditional Chinese woodwind instruments used in Chinese opera include dizi, suona, sheng, guan. Regional genres. Puju Shanxi, Hakka Opera Yiju, Gallery,